the base, but that would be.
There's a presence. You're right. There's a presence.
What do you make of that? What do you make? We're live, by the way. What do you make of that relationship between the UAE and Israel?
So we are being watched by humans.
We are. So be careful what you say. But
okay.
It's very, very hot topic here in the Emirates, but also globally. On the Emirates, some people are saying doubling down on the relationship with the US and Israel. Another way of looking at it is diversifying as well. The US and Israel and even South Korea, and they're talking to Europe about their military capabilities, and they've had Zelensky here as well. But I think it's an important development in terms of the dynamic in the Gulf. And I think everyone's trying to guess about everything. What is the Saudi-UAE relationship like? We've got reports now that the UAE and Saudi both attacked Iran, and the UAE attacked Iran even after the ceasefire, probably in retaliation to the attacks against the UAE. We had a report, the former, I think the foreign minister of Saudi, I can't remember who it was, who made a statement that Israel and Iran were trying to drag the Gulf into the conflict, and they refused to be dragged into it. And I've heard the same thing from other Gulf countries. It's been a while we haven't spoken. What's your analysis of how things have unfolded and all the information we have now? There's a lot.
Yeah, there is. Maybe to stick with where you started, in terms of how this is playing out in the Gulf, where you are and elsewhere. And I do think it looks quite different depending on where you are in the Gulf, especially if you're in Saudi or not, because I think, Saudi is not a city state. It's a large country. It has that strategic depth, and has been much less impacted. Of course, there have been attacks on Saudi, but I think this looks very different if you're in Dubai, Manama, Kuwait City, Doha. Obviously, Oman is a different thing. I do think the UAE has staked out a unique position. Bahrain is the closest to that, but the nature of the UAE relationship with Israel is of a different order of magnitude. I personally think it doesn't encourage anything constructive from the Israeli side, but apparently that's something that the UAE is okay to align with. I don't think that's where Saudi wants to or intends to be, and I think what we've seen is that the place that Saudi UAE relations were in, which was obviously a very tense place before this war began, which was kind of put into a box during the most intense period of the war. I think that seems to be back out again, right? With the decision to leave OPEC, with some of the stuff Emirati leadership have said, with the attendance at the GCC summit in Saudi, not at the highest level on the part of the UAE. So I think they're back in a quite tense place, and therefore I don't think that you're going to see Saudi volunteer. It might find itself forced to. I don't think that's going to be the case, to go down that UAE route in terms of how it navigates its relationship either with Israel or with Iran. Clearly everywhere in the Gulf there's an understandable real anger at having been targeted by Iran, but also concern as to what happens next, and in most places at least, an understanding that Iran isn't going anywhere. So it's not going to work out well for the Gulf if Iran implodes.
They're also upset at Israel. Let me read out those two statements. The former foreign minister of Saudi said, Israel possesses a great danger to regional stability as Iran and is trying to drag them into the war. So that was the former foreign minister. And then the former head of intelligence, Saudi head of intelligence. If the Israeli plan succeeded in igniting war between us and Iran, the region will be transformed into a state of devastation and destruction. What's the stand now on the Gulf relative to Israel? Are they more wary of Israel, more dependent on Israel, closer to Israel, or further away from Israel?
Well, you read those two statements, and I don't think they are coming out of thin air in terms of where they stand vis-a-vis what the Saudi leadership is thinking. So, and that is very different from the UAE position. So I do think that Saudi and others are looking at this as a threat from Israeli maximalism as well. That if we're talking about containment, then Israel too needs to be contained. They understand that Israel has a project here of attempting to impose itself as a dominant regional player. They don't want to see it that way. They know that what comes along with that is the kind of radicalism, extremism from the Israeli side, the destructive zero-sum criminal actions against the Palestinians, which play out very badly on everyone's screens. Everyone's got their devices out, seeing what Israel is doing. That has a radicalizing, destabilizing influence. Israel started this war with America, wasn't interested in the Gulf perspectives, in how it might impact the Gulf. America apparently wasn't very interested either, which is a real wake-up call. So I do think that what you see, and it plays out in this this loose beginnings of an ongoing coordination between Saudi, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt. What you are seeing is very nascent. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but a nascent asking of the question, do we also need to deter Israel, and how do we do that? And the comments you read out from the former Saudi officials, we've seen similar stuff coming from HBJ, former Prime Minister, senior Qatari. And we saw an important interview which said very similar things about containing Israel with Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan when he was visiting Qatar yesterday.
And behind the scenes, the producers are going to take you off camera just to fix your connection. But behind the scenes as well, there's been a lot of similar talk by Gulf countries. And I think this is something that we're going to see unfold long term. In the short term, all the focus is on Iran. But in the long term, the Gulf need to reevaluate their relations with the US even, as well as obviously Iran and, of course, Israel. That's a big one that not enough people are talking about, because a lot of them blame Israel for this war in the first place. And we saw even, I expect the same thing to happen from the Emirates as well, guys. Even the Emirates, we've seen that statement from Al Habtoul, probably the most aggressive statement. He's not in the royal family, he's not in the government, but he's a very influential, wealthy person in the UAE. And he was very critical of Lindsey Graham, the US, and mainly Israel and Israeli influence over the US. And even hinted that he believes, from what I remember, that Israel is trying to drag the entire Gulf into this war. And there's been a lot of similar concerns by Gulf countries throughout the war, especially in the early stages. But later, obviously, the focus kind of shifted more to Iran, the country that is striking them all. Let me give you guys a bit of an update on the news while we wait for Daniel's connection to be corrected, to be fixed. So the first one is a pretty big piece of information that came out yesterday by the New York Times. And it said that only 10% of Iran's missile bases have been permanently disabled. Also, it talks about how 90%, 10% have been disabled. 90% are either fully or partially operational and considered too heavily fortified to take out with airstrikes alone. So you've got the New York Times right now saying that in that report, we had earlier reports that were also going to bombshells at the time, but that was only like a week or two ago, that Iran has 70 to 75% of their missiles and missile launchers still available, which contradicts the initial reports about 70 to 75% being destroyed. Remember, in the early days of the war. Now a complete flip to 75% remain operational. Well, now in terms of their bases, their missile bases, only 10% have been permanently disabled. That means 90% have been rendered operational again. It's usually what happened with these airstrikes. They would destroy the entrances to these bases instead of being able to destroy the bases themselves. And what Iran has done since the ceasefire is remove all the debris, all the rubble from these entrances, and to be able to make the base operational again. So that kind of gives you an idea of why I think war is highly unlikely. The US just doesn't have the munitions alone to destroy these bases, and Israel doesn't have the capabilities. And they've said this already. Channel 12 put out a report. The Israeli intelligence believe that Israel alone, without US support, don't even have the capabilities to destroy Iran's missiles and missile stockpiles and missile launchers. What's crazy to me is how they didn't know this before starting this war. That is just wild. Or did they not know this? Or did Israel know this but give false information to the US to convince Trump to start this war? Just the more we find out from this war, the stupider it starts to sound. Then we've got a neocon, Robert Kagan. we've talked about it before. He put out an article that got a lot of traction 3 days ago. This is someone that supports, very hawkish, and one of the leading neocons in the US. I think he's the husband of Victoria Nuland, and he put out a report on The Atlantic saying how the US was defeated in the war and Trump has no options. He said, quote, defeat is in the present confrontation with Iran will be of an entirely different character. The article is called Checkmate in Iran. And he says, it can neither be repaired nor ignored. So he said the defeat that the US faced in Iran can't be repaired or ignored. This is someone, again, that's very, very hawkish on Iran, very supportive of the war, admitting the reality we're dealing with right now, the position that Trump is in, which really obsessed me. Like, these people are the ones that convinced Trump to start this war. Trump should fully own up to that mistake. They convinced him to start this war. And then now they're in a position like, oh, he lost, we're screwed. After Trump is stuck in this war. Others are taking a different stance. At least Robert is honest enough to admit the reality of the situation. Others are, sorry, I'm just a bit sick, guys. Others are trying to convince Trump to continue the war, trying to convince Trump to come up with some sort of military operation that includes seizing the islands, because somehow that will work in controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Others are advocating for the bombing of their infrastructure, their energy infrastructure, one of the stupidest ideas. These rallies are advocating for that. But if he does that, say bye-bye to the Gulf, because the Iran would do the same thing for to the Gulf as well. I had one of my guests tell me that, no, not necessarily, Mario. If Iran's energy infrastructure is struck, if that's escalated to that level, Iran would give a chance for the Gulf to pick a side and either cut all ties with the US and Israel and kick out American bases from the region, or face the military might of Iran. Iran will just attack their energy infrastructure. So there is a possibility that Iran might give that ultimatum to the Gulf, according to a guest, I can't remember who it was on the show who said that. Might have been Malcolm Nance that said it. We also know that there's a nuclear submarine that popped up with one that has the Trident II missiles on board that is nuclear capable. It popped up in Gibraltar right after Iran sent that counteroffer to Trump, which Trump did not like at all. So it looks like a signal by the Americans to the Iranians, like, this is not a good signal, because we've got Trump talking about the glow. I think he said orange glow, or a big glow on top of Iran. That was a threat he made a few days ago that people interpreted as him threatening with a nuclear strike, which, again, things that no American president or even diplomat should ever utter. This red line should never be brought up under any circumstances. Well, now they put up a submarine, a nuclear-capable submarine in Gibraltar. A lot of people are taking that as an indicator of a similar threat, a reminder to Iran, not that we'll use nuclear weapons, that we have them, maybe hinting about the possibility of using them. Daniel, we've just talked about the Gulf, and I was just telling the audience, like, I'm not sure if you were listening, but I was telling the audience that I think the US would a lot of the Gulf would in the short term, they're reevaluating their relationship with Iran and how to deal with Iran, and the fact that they need to accept a more powerful Iran in the region unless the war continues and Iran is further degraded. Highly unlikely. Or the other alternative is, not alternative, what they need to do afterwards is also reevaluate their relationship and alliance with the US and with Israel. Before we move to China, I want to ask you a question on that. What do you make of the Emirati foreign policy position?
Well, the Emirati position, I think, is a hedge. Clearly very close to the US, clearly the closest relationship to Israel, for very good reasons. That's not a popular position necessarily in the region. I think that causes them problems, but that's not their assessment. But let's also pay attention to the fact that the most high-level delegation from the Gulf region to have been in Beijing since the start of this war was the Crown Prince from the UAE. So while the UAE looks like it's ostensibly most Israel-US aligned, and while it is the most Israeli aligned in the region, it is also well down the path of a hedge that involves China as well.
Agree. I think that's a really good analysis, because the UAE is getting a lot of criticism for that position, rightly so. I think it's fair to criticize the Emirati position and their alliance with Israel. And Iran is saying this is the reason that the Emirates was struck more than any other country. The counter argument was that the Emirates needs, it's very vulnerable to these attacks. 90% expats in the country. Them and I think Qatar have the highest percentage of expats in the Gulf and in the world. I think in the top 10 countries that have the most expats, I think 7 of them are the Gulf. The entire Gulf is in it. So yeah, the Emirates are in that position where they do need those defensive capabilities.
But are they? I mean, I think the question. I think one thing we should just pause on and ask is, are they, by those choices, isolating themselves a bit too much in the region, including in their immediate region, including this relationship with Saudi, including what they've done to their relationship with Saudi? And is this move on OPEC, the withdrawal from OPEC, the decision to double down, obviously, on the fossil fuel part of their economy, is that also sending the signal that they're perhaps in some ways not fully expecting things to return to normal with the expat community, with what Dubai has become, and even with this, AI data centers? Are those going to go ahead when this vulnerability has been exposed? I think those are all open questions.
That's a second question, is a really interesting one. You're saying that them pulling out of OPEC and doubling down on energy and doubling down on the AI data centers, is the UAE diversifying away from tourism and being a business hub? Because that's very vulnerable. Is that what you're saying? Because what they've done is that tourism and business becoming a business hub and having all these expats was their diversification away from energy, from oil. And now what you're saying is we could be seeing the complete flip happening, where they're diversifying away from the very vulnerable reliance on the expats.
I think that's at least one way of interpreting what they've done, and it's worth following and interrogating in the weeks and months to come. It's a reasonable reading of that move.
No one's mentioned that. That's a really good point, Daniel. I'm going to steal that and say it's my ID. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Go for it. It's yours. It's yours, mate.
So what do you make of the reports of Saudi and the UAE before we move to China? One last question there. Hold on. There's a statement on the UAE just came out.
In response to what I just said.
UAE, no. The UAE initial report. The UAE's arrested 50 Iranian cells. Just came out now. Just one more question on that is before we move to China, the attacks by the Saudi and the UAE on Iran, expected as deterrence or concerning?
Well, let's pause. I think the UAE direct attacks are well documented. Saudi is a lot more murky. I also don't think that to the extent to which those both might be the case, they were joint attacks. So what UAE is doing is one thing, what Saudi is doing is another. I do think there's much more of a target on the UAE back than on Saudi's back. Iran has largely, not entirely, but largely avoided targeting Saudi. I think also, if you look at the intermediary role that Pakistan plays, the recent conversations between Saudi and Iranian foreign ministers, so there are still open channels there. I do think that the Emirati-Iranian animosity and the way that might continue to play out has gone a lot deeper, especially the link into Israel.
Why? But why? Because historically it's been Saudi and Iran that had that massive rivalry. How did it become now?
And of course, the UAE
when they did a lot of business together.
Exactly, the UAE was such an important business hub for Iran. I think it is the doubling down on the relationship with Israel being seen as something of an Israeli extension in the Gulf region, and maybe, and all of this is to some degree speculative, but maybe Iran thinking that it actually plays well with a broader audience if you focus more on striking UAE, particularly for that reason that we've discussed, that while you will get the expressions of solidarity, which you do get from across the region, that is very skin deep. And actually, it's not an unpopular target in the context of the Israel relationship, that all those things may be factored in. And I'm not saying Saudi is encouraging this, don't get me wrong, but Iran will also be very aware of Saudi Emirati tensions and how those have existed
Iran is
before,
being so
on
strategic
Yemen, on
in all
Sudan.
this.
Well, it's being strategic.
So sneaky. Yeah.
Well, they're being strategic. I also don't want to exaggerate that, but also we have an expression, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So if the others are being very unstrategic, then you don't have to be that strategic to look more strategic.
All right, so let's move to China. How significant is it? And I had a guest earlier who said, Mario, I worry that Israel could sabotage the meeting, like Trump and Xi could come to some sort of agreement like Trump and Iran, but then Israel may sabotage it the same way they tried to sabotage, or they successfully sabotage, depending who you ask, the deal between the US and Iran. Now, my position is I don't think Israel still has those capabilities they had before the war. They kind of bit off more than they can chew in this war, and Trump has lost confidence in their analysis and intelligence. That's my speculative assessment. But would love to get yours on the meeting with Xi. How significant is it? Could it yield any results? And Israel's role in all this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that probably usefully siloed out. Trump Xi, in terms of the US-China bilateral, how that relationship is going to be structured in the coming period, obviously hugely consequential. I think that from a Chinese perspective, they would rather this is primarily a visit that focuses on bilateral issues, on trade, on tariffs, on creating, from a Chinese perspective, as much predictability in this relationship as they can. That may or may not work out. This is Trump. I think China does not. China enjoys watching, I'm sure, Trump weaken America, sully its reputation, demonstrate decline anxiety, launch a war that has gone, I think, very bad.
Yeah. I think Daniel's not the only person, just while waiting for your connection to fix. Daniel's not the only person that says that. So Lisa, if you can fix Daniel's connection, his screen went black. China, you're not the only person to say that China's strategy, China's position in these negotiations will not focus on Iran, which is very surprising to me. Like, I disagree with Sammy, who I talked with earlier, who said the same thing, and Daniel now. But again, they're more qualified than me. But the reason I disagree is I just feel like both countries really need that issue resolved. China needs the oil and the gas that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. They're the biggest customer of everything that comes out of there. And the US obviously needs that water end for multiple reasons you all know. So that's why I think they will find a solution. But what will make it difficult is on whose terms, again, is that China's looking at this as their chance to have more leverage in the region by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, have more leverage over Gulf countries. Like, you guys don't understand the amount of leverage China has already gained and will continue to gain as this war drags on or gets resolved under pretty shitty terms for the US. And the US, obviously, before the midterms, Trump needs this war to end. So that's why I'd be surprised if they don't heavily focus on Iran in that meeting. Now, but Daniel does make a point, like the people that have gone with Trump to this meeting, Elon, Jensen from NVIDIA, Tim Cook from Apple, Larry Fink from BlackRock, Blackstone, Boeing, Cargill, Citigroup, GE, Goldman Sachs, Micron, and Qualcomm. All these companies, the CEOs of these companies or executives, I think the executives from Meta are going as well. I'm not sure why it's not on this list. Are going there for a reason, as Sammy said. China wants restrictions on them and their companies removed in the US, and American companies would like their restrictions removed in China. So the two countries want to improve business relations. And look, when these two countries improve their relationships when it comes to business, I think that will be immediately a positive. They will have positive repercussions to geopolitical power struggles that are happening around the world, where China and the US are indirectly involved, including the Russia-Ukraine war, including the war in the region. Because when they're doing more business together, they've got improved relations. It makes it easier to be able to come to some sort of agreement on these issues. Obviously, China's not going to dictate what happens in Ukraine and not dictate what happens in Iran, but it definitely has significant influence, and so does the US. In terms of the blockade, there's some updates on that front, guys. Just one update here. Iran seems to be struggling. There was a report by Bloomberg on the blockade. Iran's main oil export terminal has gone dark for the first time since the war began. I think they're talking about Kharg Island. No tankers were spotted at Kharg Island on May 8th, 9th, or 11th. Wow. the longest stretch without activity since the war started. Storage tanks on the island are filling up fast, with satellite images showing shrinking spare capacity. At least 18 tankers are now anchored nearby, used as floating storage facilities. Since the blockade, if storage reaches capacity, Iran could be forced to cut oil production entirely. Trump officials predicted this outcome weeks ago. Analysts at Kepler estimated Iran could hold out until late May, which is in 2 weeks' time. So it just shows that the blockade is working, and there's a nice chart in that tweet. The producers are sorting out Daniel's connection. There's a nice chart. I wish I could see it. That would show you in terms of the capacity, the amount of activity at Khargan, and it has dropped significantly in the last few days. So that does show that the oil storage facilities are reaching their peak levels, and it shows that they're using floating storage, which are cargo ships, older ships that have been used to store the oil, so that I have to shut off the wells. But when the capacity is filled across the board, the next step would be to start shutting down those wells, and that would cause long-term and permanent damage to their capacity to keep extracting oil. So Iran is in a pretty tough position economically. Now, we'll continue this conversation in a bit, guys. Daniel's connection is having issues. So I'm going to take a break. As you can see, my nose is clogging up again. So let me give it a quick spray. And our next guest is in 20 minutes. We've got Alex Craner, geopolitical analyst. You guys really like him. He'll be coming on in 19 minutes, and he focuses heavily on the kind of the bigger picture on how Iran fits into the global geopolitical picture, including China. That fits into everything else. As always, whenever he looks at things, he looks at them from a holistic and historical perspective that you guys really enjoy. So I haven't spoken to him in a few weeks now. So he'll be with him live in 19 minutes. All right, guys, see you shortly. Bye.